All right. Welcome, everybody. This is V Connecting. I'm Susan Adams from Portland, Oregon, here with Chris Gilliard for the digital redlining V Connecting talk today, and he has a couple of colleagues with him that we'll introduce in a moment. And he just finished his session at OLC Innovate. So that's why we're here today with both virtual participants and on-site participants, and we're excited to hear how his session went and engage in a dialogue. So let's start off with folks on site. Introduce yourselves, and then we'll move into the virtual folks. So, Chris, take it away.
Oh, okay. I'm Chris Gilliard. I teach at Macomb Community College, and as you mentioned, just did a session on digital redlining. That was a follow-up from my lightning talk from yesterday on digital redlining.
And I'm Hugh Kulik, and I teach alongside Chris at Macomb Community College, and had the pleasure of working together for, about 22 years, and I've learned a lot from him.
And I'm Kristen Esselman. I'm Director of Digital Learning R&D at Davidson College. I'm a big fan of Chris's. I got to meet him at the D-Learn conference last October and heard him talk about this research, and very excited about where it might go in the future.
Great. Thank you. Bill.
Hey, my name is Bill Fitzgerald, and I'm at Common Sense Media, and I run a privacy evaluation initiative there. And again, I've known Chris online for a while, and actually had the pleasure of meeting him in person earlier this year. And intersections between digital redlining and privacy are something I've been kind of thinking about for a bit, and Chris's work and Hugh's work helps bring that into a greater focus.
Great. Thanks, Bill. And Dipali?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Dipali Butch. I teach at Folsom Lake College here in California, Sacramento, and I teach business. I've been teaching online since late 90s, and this topic is so interesting for me. Thank you very much for the opportunity, everyone out there, and we connecting, and the guest speakers, and everybody. I'm looking forward to conversations. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dipali. Keegan?
Hello, my name is Keegan. I work at the University of Oklahoma as an educational technologist. And I'm here to hang out. I'm not as familiar with this topic, so it was it sounded pretty interesting though. So I'm excited to learn more.
Great. Thanks, Keegan. And Lee?
Hey, I'm Lee Scholar-Passett. I'm an instructional technology specialist at the University of Mary Washington. But this subject is near and dear to my heart because for a long time I taught at a regional state, rural state institution in the heart of Appalachia, where this was always such a huge issue for our students, both inside of the classroom and as we expanded into online. I had students who were still on dial-up at this point, so it was really this is something that I've thought a lot about and written a lot about in the past, and so I'm really excited to be a part of this.
Great.
And I know Chris. Thanks. We know each other from Twitter.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone. Chris, we'd love to hear, how did the session go? What came up, and what was connected with the most there?
Well, I think it went really well. I decided to go sort of non-traditional, and I didn't do the PowerPoint thing. I just talked, and what I did is I tried to kind of follow up from the lightning talk and fill in a bunch of the gaps, and basically kind of explain. I tried to have a discussion, but the base of it was sort of what brought Hugh and I to start thinking about this, and how we think people sort of misunderstand questions about access in terms of students, and the questions that often don't get asked at conferences like these, about who has access and what kind of access they have, who our students are, why these things matter, and so it went pretty well. I mean, we had some dissenting voices, which is good, and but lots of people had interesting questions and experiences to share, so I'm pretty happy with it.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about those dissenting voices. Sorry, I just heard an echo.
Well, one of the things we talked about was the idea of risk, right? Because, well, specifically, the policy at our school has been that faculty are only allowed to talk to students through campus email. So there's tons of problems with that, right? And one of the problems simply being that our campus email doesn't work very well. But the other problem is the degree to which that prevents students from using all these other technologies that I think would help them, right? No Slack, no Facebook, no Twitter, no anything. And the one other problem that has is that at a public institution, our emails are subject to FOIA, right? And so it's a pretty short leap to think about discussions I might have with my students that conservative or vendetta-based politicians in my state might FOIA in an attempt to say that I'm using public funds and public facilities to do things that are outside the scope of my duties. And so simply on that point alone, I would say that notion that you can only communicate with students through campus emails is a bit of a problem. The dissent came when a gentleman said that it was the job of the university and legal counsel to lock down risk, right? And that his position was that legal is supposed to make sure that there's the least risk possible. And so to the extent that I was okay with all of my colleagues getting fired if we got sued, then I should be, I could be okay with using social media to talk to my students and things like that. But to the extent that I don't want that to happen, I'd better be okay with just using campus email to communicate with students. So he was kind of wrong on a few points, but and what that brings up is sort of what is the where does risk fall in these kinds of questions, like what is acceptable yield in terms of risk, but also if college becomes what legal says it is, then I think we have lots of problems.
The other thing that was kind of interesting was that argument is the argument you hear at community colleges. I don't think it's the argument you hear at R1s or something like that. And so when I see what it does to the working class students who go to community colleges, who are a distinct group, they're half the college students in the country, under what that, I think he was an attorney, was saying, the students are excluded from innovation, they're excluded from information, and on the other hand, the students who are going to the R1s have a different level of access, a different type of freedom, and in our view, I think we would say that what that really does is serve to preserve class divisions and class preferences and so forth. It's a type of discrimination that can be nearly invisible.
And how does the framing of kind of the role of these policies as risk reduction align with or conflict with some of the rhetoric we have about education as being a place where it's actually safe to take risks and safe to fail? I mean, there seems to be a tension there.
That's a great question. I mean, and again, I think that I hate to say this out loud while I'm being recorded, right? But I think that those kinds of discussions aren't necessarily the discussions at community colleges. I mean, certainly not in my experience. We're there to train students to be, the next workforce, as we were talking about earlier. Yeah. So that question of risk from the top down is not the same as you would have at other places.
I do wonder to what extent it reflects your IT structure. So I'm coming from the IT side of the house. I'm trying to put an IT lens on this. And we have traditionally at Davidson been structured under our VP of Business and Finance, which I think is the structure that you guys are experiencing.
Yeah.
And we had a much more conservative approach for a number of years around bandwidth, access, sort of shutting down ports. There was that security first approach because we were focused more on the infrastructure than being in alignment with the academic mission. And now we have moved under academic affairs. And so the conversations we have now are more how do we align our IT services to the academic strategic mission of the college, not so much, not that we ignore the administrative side of it, we have to acknowledge that, but it does kind of balance that conversation a little bit better. So I wonder to what extent it might actually reflect your IT structure and the way their priorities are given from the top
That's
down.
a great
That's
point.
a great point. That really is.
Yeah, and part of our initial work, we interviewed about 6 CIOs, right? And many of them kind of said that, right? That their job was to align with the mission of the college, right? Ours is not. I don't think it operates that way.
No,
And
it's
so
more at the behest of the individual preferences and ignorances of the administrators to whom the CIO reports.
Yeah.
And so if we have people who are very worried, quite literally saying there shouldn't be anything available on the screen that would upset my 5-year-old child, and that's quotation, that preference is what becomes the major shaper of policy. It's not the CIO's notion of how they might also serve academic freedom and so forth. It's a very different administration.
And for us, it was the more we moved to the cloud, and the less we had to maintain our infrastructure in-house, the more open we came to these conversations.
Really?
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened with us at Oregon Health and Science University. We are run by the hospital, which sort of feeds the school, and that's the structure there too. Exactly what you're saying, Kristen. And I think it's interesting to think about that as the problem and the solution.
Yeah.
Because once that structure changes, who's at the table becomes the conversation becomes entirely different. And I've heard that a few times even at the conference where we're asking that question, what is the structure? And a great example is, I went to EduCause and, they were putting out the red carpet to EduCause for all the CIOs.
Mm-hmm.
But my CIO wasn't there and she didn't even know about it. Has never, heard about it at all. So, and it's like, and I come home and I don't have an audience with her necessarily, or, so I'm sitting here kind of slowly chipping away to see where that conversation can start to happen and will we be invited to the table. Yeah.
This is really helpful to me. We have this strange and unmanageable table that has acceptable use policies from about 109 different institutions, each of in their sectioned according to whether they're community colleges, art ones, whatever. It's the Carnegie classification. And what we're really interested in is where the differences lie in terms of governance, enforcement. We've got a set of things, but when we started out, our real focus was on, is it security-based or is it inquiry-based? We had sort of a much more abstract set of binaries that we were trying to apply, but we've been forced back further and further into questions of governance that certainly were not foremost in our minds when we started this.
Mm-hmm. I'd also like to maybe move the conversation because I really appreciate the structure piece. But let's imagine if we're at the table, because what I'm hearing is trust, right? And like if we're going to be in that place of, inviting trust, which the opposite of that is fear. Fear that someone's going to be inappropriate. Fear that openness is chaotic and. Maybe I'm not articulating it as well as I'd like to right now, but I've been thinking about that tension that's going on and that sort of inherent values that I'm assuming many of us have as educators. How do we articulate and how do we begin to chip away at that fear and build a capacity for allowance to some of these really, I shouldn't say the word innovative, but new ways of educating that allow for openness, allow for discovery, emergence. In the digital spaces?
Well, I would start out and I would say that you have to be willing to grieve your administration. You need a powerful union, and you need to sort of get over the idea that you can actually make peace with these people. They do not hold our values about openness. They do not share our values about experimentation. And for us, the only way we've got movement is because the school faced both a legal threat for me and a union threat that Chris and Mary and I put together over freedom, academic freedom issues. And I don't think relying on the good intention of our masters is going to work. I think they have to be. I think we have to strike back at them.
Now I'm gonna walk that back a little bit because coming out, going to D-Learn, being here, is that we've met a bunch of people that, in fact, have shown us that we're not crazy, right? I mean, they're, Rollin is in a position, we've met so many people who actually are in administrative positions or positions that are at our institution would help make these kinds of decisions, who do share our values. We've just wound up sometimes with people who don't. I mean, Kristen's taken up our cause amazingly, right? I think part of the problem is having people, who have limited experience with students, right, or who have a very ill-defined notion of who students are and what they're capable of, right? Because what we've really found is that there seems to be a pretty strong connection between, and no one articulated this, right? So, the people that we've dealt with haven't sat down and said, I don't think much of the students, and so they don't get very good access, right? Or I don't think much of the students, so we're going to lock down the network. But even though it's not articulated, that seems to be what's happening, right? And so the more or the better idea people have of sort of what students are and what they're capable of, right? I think the more we can address these from sort of a trust base rather than a fear base or a prohibition. And because again, one of this chart we keep referring to, one of the things that we found too is that lots of places attempt this sort of catch-all language, like don't do anything that you've heard of and don't do anything that you haven't heard of, but when we're going to talk about innovation, right, then that catch-all language essentially is there to prevent anything, anything new or different from happening, right? And again, the whole point being, what effect does this have on students, right? Because we want them to experiment, we want them to try different things. We want professors, I mean, I assume other people do. We want them to try and see what new things can work and how they can be effective. And when you have that kind of catch-all language of just prevent everything that you never thought of, then you're preventing that.
I think one of the things that we don't want to lose sight of is that community colleges have a different idea of what education is supposed to do. They explicitly say that they are training. After we did the DLRN paper, as a courtesy, I sent it to our provost, which was really a mistake. And we got this scathing letter.
It was really a mistake.
I have no idea why I sent it.
It was a really bad idea.
It was really a bad idea. Okay, and it was, just shoot me while I behave in public again. And so it's a scathing letter saying that we are quite mistaken thinking that information access is class-based, that they're not involved in treating people differentially according to class, that we've sort of said bad things about the college, and make sure that everybody knows you're speaking for yourselves, not for the college. That's like a conference paper, like relax. And but it showed how when you have a view of education as training and training for corporate interests, you're going to lose a lot of things like the idea of academic freedom or non-standard outputs as being good and things like that.
Any questions from virtual folks?
I don't know if I have a question, but I strongly recommend that letter be the beginning of your next paper.
I'll tell you, we got a splendid letter from our CIO just yesterday about how we are actually going to have a meeting again to talk about the acceptable use policy, but it's not going to be a discussion and trying to thrash out, hey, how can we stop this war? But they will send a draft for us to consider. You know, and it
will be 2 years in the summer.
Right.
Since we last were able to meet with
them, yeah. And the answer is, say, hey, we're going to go out for a beer. Let's have a beer and talk about acceptable use policies. You know, but that's not the way it happens.
I'm really interested in Lee's perspective because I don't know if you saw that. I think it was Inside Higher Ed just ran a piece about a week ago that talked about the disparity between rural access. Oh no, she's gone.
Oh no, she'll come right back.
Asking her a
question. I bet you she meant to press her unmute button and by mistake hung up.
Oh, okay.
I think she's still up.
Are you still there, Lee?
Nope, she'll have to join us.
I think she dropped out, but I bet you she just...
Wait, way to run her off.
What did you say to her?
I know.
Well, while we're waiting for Lee, I just wanted to throw this out to people for discussion. Or actually, I think DePauli had a question.
Yeah, looks like DePauli did.
So I didn't have a question, but thanks. I would like to add to conversations. In our community colleges in California, we have online education initiative going on, and we have colleagues there, Anna Sterling. If you get chance to meet her, she is loaded with lots of resources out there, and they can be useful. They have been developed, and they are available for all of the community colleges to use. So great resources.
Oh, great! Thank you.
Yeah, I saw her name on Twitter.
Yeah, DePauli, can you place that in the chat box and we'll tweet it out and.
Yes. I'm going to also place things on Twitter. But last few days have been really rough with a lot of things going on, crazily multitasking. But I'll get back on Twitter and connect with you. But let me place information right here in the text box here.
Okay, thanks, DePauli. I think we got Lee back.
Yeah, sorry about that. I got spinning wheel of death, and you're like, he's going to ask me a question, and my computer is completely frozen up. I'm like, no! Could you repeat it for me? Because I heard the Inside Higher Ed, and then that was it.
On a lot of this, because Inside Higher Ed just ran a piece about the disparity in the access between rural areas and urban and suburban areas, even in the cost, right? That rural areas pay 2.5 times more for megabyte per second than other places, and so I just wanted to kind of hear your about some of your experiences and maybe how your folks address that.
Not very well. We had students, I mean, even some of the faculty. It was in Moorhead, Kentucky, which is about an hour east of Lexington, Kentucky, in the heart of Appalachia. And you didn't have to drive very far outside of Moorhead where you couldn't even get high-speed internet, right? There was no broadband, so you were on dial-up. And then the only other option, though, was to get satellite, which, as you said, was 2 to 3 to 5 times more expensive than just getting it. So students, you know, we had Blackboard, and students would have assignments that they needed to complete and all that kind of stuff. And you know, they couldn't do it because they couldn't get them to load. I had a computer science student in my freshman writing class who she's a computer science major, and she had just bought her first computer. Right, that was the first computer that she's ever owned, and so there was a lot of issues around that. But they almost all had mobile phones in a lot of cases. But then the coverage wasn't great either. Right, they'd go home and there'd be very little data coverage. And I mean, the attitude was, unfortunately, particularly if they were taking online courses, it was like, well, then don't go home. Right, they wanted to keep the students on campus because it's a retention issue. Right, if the students live on campus and get involved in campus life, they're more likely to be retained. So they should stay on campus. Yeah, I know. If you're taking an online course, then you should know that you're taking an online course and you should have this kind of access. You know, so there was sort of this attitude where, you know, yes, we realized it was a problem, but you know, and the flip side of that, of course, is like, look at all of these online courses we're offering as a service to our region, right? When a lot of the region couldn't access said services. You know, and so you had this, and rather than offering, say, night classes, because a lot of them said the only reason I'm taking this class online is because my work schedule won't allow it. If you offered more night classes, I would drive to come and take a night class once a week. But that wasn't getting through. Those messages weren't getting through, and the lines were getting crossed. And so you had this really deep divide, and we also had these issues of privacy, of what we were and weren't allowed to do. But you know, your school says they didn't openly distrust the students, but it's clear in the policy there was open distrust of the students, right? Particularly around questions of cheating. You know, that the more we do, the more they'll cheat. How do we know it's them? So, and they were very open about the trust issues, and very open about when I would talk about using technology, when I would talk about doing marginally innovative things in the class, right? I was told point blank by people, the students can't handle that. Students can't do that. No, you're asking too much of them. They can't do that.
Yeah.
Right? And you know, and it was always, you know, in some ways my contingent position, nobody really paid any attention to me. So it was always hacking stuff, right? What can we do for free? What can we do on our phones? What can we do with low bandwidth? Because even my building, like, and this is an issue as well for these underfunded schools like community colleges, which is why I'm so happy. Not that it's being discussed more. I had a computer at the front of the classroom that was running Windows 2000. Right? And so even to be able to do things in class, like my students would do PowerPoint presentations, not very technologically enabled, and they wouldn't necessarily run on the computer at the front of the classroom.
It's the thing that so many people don't think about. I mean, I was explaining just the other day that I had to use my iPad to create a hotspot for my students in my class, right? Which is actually a computer lab, right?
All the time.
Yeah.
Another one, yeah, go on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, another thing is I taught an honors class, which was fantastic, and the part of the honors program was all these honors students got their own laptops, and I was like, great, and the Wi-Fi's not great, but we can do all of these cool, interesting things. The only electrical outlets in the classroom were two-pronged. So then you get all of these boxes. So I like had my box of adapters and power bars and all of that kind of stuff that I would haul the class, and I had like this old super power bar from like the 1980s attached to like an adapter that I could plug into the wall, and all the students could plug their laptops in, so we could actually get done what we needed to get done. And there was like a three-pronged one out in the hall, so people would sit by the door and have the cord sticking out in the hallway. In that sort of way. And all I wanted to do was use Timeline.js with them. Right? Like access Google Docs and use Timeline.js, but there was all of these like infrastructure and deferred maintenance issues, which a lot of these, which again I think adds to the burden of the students, where increasingly we're burdening the students with having to make these purchases and maybe having to do these hacks. And you know, and for in a lot of cases, I didn't blame faculty, and sometimes for not wanting to do these things, because if the infrastructure that we had access to wasn't even allowing us or frustrating us in our attempts, how are we supposed to be able to help the students do it?
Right.
Right? And that was also a really big tension.
That makes me think about we had this conversation at breakfast. You know, one of the things I was hoping we could talk about as a group here is, what are the next steps in making this visible, more visible from a research perspective? Because I think that's what will drive change. I tend to be biased in that regard, but you know, narrative research, hard data, I mean, all these things. Because what you just talked about, Lee, is not something that has anything to do with policy necessarily, but it has to do with state investment and infrastructure. I mean, there are a lot of different angles to address around this that these guys have talked about around digital redlining. But I don't think until we get some real high-quality, deep research are we going to be able to make an impact. So who do we partner with? Do we partner with ECAR? Do we partner with EDUCAUSE? I mean, who are the people we should be reaching out to begin to do a larger sort of network study on this?
And I think that's a really hard question, in part because...
Hey, Lee, can you turn your video on? Just, if you can turn your video on, that'd be great. We'd love to see your
my
face.
video's not on? Oh, I'm appearing.
You're not on.
Oh, well, it's probably my Wi-Fi. It's probably the great Wi-Fi here.
Okay, don't worry about it. I just wanted to see if it was a quick
Sorry about that. Because I can see me, so apologies. I think one of the challenges, though, too, is to get the truth from institutions about these kinds of things, right?
I was thinking that too.
You know, we had pristine labs for certain disciplines in certain buildings. You know, and if you go on a campus tour, you see the beautiful, you know, here is our smart classroom and here is our other ones, and then again, you know, a lot of these students who are coming even for the campus tours, like that there's a computer in front of the classroom was pretty revolutionary in itself, right? Not even thinking through those kinds of things. So how do you get, I think it's who do you partner with, but how do you get at the truth of the situation from the institutions who have a vested interest in not, you know, in not necessarily telling the whole truth around things like the infrastructure question, or truths that can get very hidden within larger data numbers, right? So how do we get at that?
One thing that I would love to see is just side-by-side setups where you have people doing searches on institutional infrastructure and people doing the same search on something that's not subject to it, like their phone, and compare the results. Just do side-by-side searches and then screenshots of what the results look like, because what makes this really difficult to discuss openly is that it's visibly and silently.
Bill, we've got a little audio issue. I don't know if you have do you have a mic, or are you?
I do have a mic.
Oh, you're good
You're
now.
better now. You might
Now you're good.
Okay. But actually, now I'm hearing the echo. But no, I mean, just because these things are invisible and happen silently behind the scenes, if there's no point of reference, it's impossible to actually quantify how this is working and what the effect is. But by doing a side-by-side search, we can actually demonstrate the different results and the impact that has. So in terms of actually who to partner with, I have no idea who that should be, but I think part of the issue in even determining who to partner with is that it's very difficult to quantify this issue and how it works. One other thing to actually look for, and this is a technical detail, but a lot of the ways this filtering happens is by the installation of a certificate on a local machine, which essentially means that all of your network traffic inside the institution's network is visible to people there, which means there's not only is there a filtering issue, but there's a surveillance issue. And those are two parts of the same problem, but being able to demonstrate how and why that happens would be another way to actually start to make this issue visible.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up, Bill, because I used you know, that the definition that you gave me on when we were DMing. I used that in the talk, right? And you know, you and I have talked about. I mean, the reason I initially started following you on Twitter is because you're so invested in the privacy stuff, and you and I have talked about sort of the parallels of the privacy divide. You know, sort of all the privacy you can afford with redlining. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, the short version is there's definitely an overlap between people. You know, basically, if you can afford unfettered access, you can also usually afford unobserved access, if that makes sense. And I think this is why the studies you've done on the AUPs, that actually provides a really interesting gateway into how this is institutionalized. But I mean, and Julia Angwin she actually put out a book on this recently, where she actually broke down what privacy costs. And in some ways, you know, privacy is starting to become another manifestation of privilege. And you look at who has access to things like reputation management online. It's not most of us. It's a very small number of people with access to means. But the ability to even actually escape that is, that's what makes the redlining so insidious, is that it's not just limiting options, it's actually observing when you push against those options and then feeding that back into further limitations. So we have a feedback loop which is designed to disadvantage and take options away from people who have fewer options to start with. And that's why, Lee's example of trying to keep people on campus, like, they're basically being told that their best option is something which is limited at the outset. And that's how these problems start. And yeah, I mean, the privacy implications of filtering, I think the more we can address those as two parts of the same problem, we can have a more complete conversation on this.
The other thing we might think about is that the reality is that schools purchase their technologies and set up their infrastructure with corporate advice. And while I object to that, that's the reality. So part of it becomes, how do you educate the people who are offering to make a judgment of the fit between a particular piece of technology and your institution, so that that judgment at least includes some of these questions about digital redlining, about class, about things like that. Because I really doubt that those are anywhere in the mix that makes the decision about what technology to use. Again, I deeply object to the privatization of that whole thing, but since that's the way it works, it seems to me you have to be where the decisions are actually made, and it's really much higher up than right within the installed infrastructure.
And to get back to Kristen's question just a little bit, I mean, I've been really surprised to the extent of how the CIOs we talked to were really interested in this stuff. Yeah. And I don't know that they get that there's a lot of opportunities for people to sort of ask them how they see their role in the institution. Mm-hmm. And that was like it was really enlightening, to be honest. And so maybe that's one way to sort of forward it, right? Is because I think they serve a very interesting intersection at colleges that's kind of not examined and maybe even not articulated a lot of times. So that might be some way to gain some inroads.
Well, and what was interesting to me too, in terms of thinking of partnerships, was when I was at EDUCAUSE Eli, how few community college people were there. And so I'm sure it's a funding issue because EDUCAUSE is freaking expensive. There's a timing issue as well. There's maybe an outreach issue. Maybe it's just they don't feel like that's the right place for them because they see themselves in a different mission. But I'm always now increasingly very conscious to see, well, who is at the table, who's dominating conversations? Are they R1 institutions? Are they small private liberal arts colleges? Are they regional state institutions? Are they community colleges? Well, if they're not, then where are they having these kinds of conversations? Are they even taking place at all? Are there regional organizations for the CIOs of community colleges? I mean, these are questions that I really don't know the answer to, but it's those kinds of things where, particularly for the underfunded state institutions, both I would say four-year and community college, even though the issues are quite different in a lot of ways, that question of funding, that question of the kinds of students that they serve, there are intersections there, and it would be like asking questions: where are they? Where are they meeting, if at all? If we can't bring them to the table, how do we get to their tables? Or do we need to help them set up their own tables in this kind of way? In that sort of way, and in that question, because I don't know that the national organizations are the place to help, because there doesn't seem to be that presence in that of the kinds of institutions we want to look at, or we would be interested in looking at, and interested in helping getting that message out more. That makes sense?
It does, and this is where a locking of arms is. It's curious to me that it doesn't happen, because at least from the community college to R1 pipeline, there are a lot of community college students that go to R1s. It's in their best interest for community college students to have the best quality education.
Yeah.
So it seems to me like that's an obvious place to start. Yeah, it's very weird that they would be siloed in that regard.
Yeah, and another thing. Oh, I'm sorry, Lee. Were you?
No, I'm good.
Another thing,
I'll do that.
and Hugh and I are actually working on a paper in this regard. Is the privileging of quantitative research, right? Yeah. That people have got the math, right? They've got the numbers, and then that gets to be the stand-in for all kinds of evidence, right? Where I can't just say, well, I have all these experiences, and so I don't know how to overcome that. But especially when we're talking about technology, this is a huge issue because, as we get into algorithms and filtering and all that stuff, right, people want to see numbers, right? And I don't have that kind of information about how my students are being negatively affected, but I have all other kinds of information that says that.
But if you have higher numbers of narrative research points, like more stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. And there's that whole history of thinking of mathematics as a purely representational system, that it actually represents reality, which no mathematician in their right mind would claim. But you see it invoked continually in educational technology justifications. And I just feel like what people need to do maybe is read Amir Alexander's book on the history of calculus, and try and work through Gödel's proof, and try and do some of these things that remind you that numbers are another sign system, that they need to be approached semiotically, all those sorts of things, to get away from being so simplistically, naively oriented to numbers. But that's a tough sell. Who wants to really go out and read that stuff?
Well, and I think another place to find people. I think part of the challenge as well in getting these kinds of quality narratives is that a lot of these situations and these classroom situations are being dealt with adjuncts, and they're scared to speak out, right? I bet you could find the classrooms of shame and the technology horror stories. I see them on Twitter all the time. I see them on the adjunct listservs all the time. But they unless you can find, that's an untapped sort of, I don't want to use the word market, but an untapped resource of these kinds of narratives, because very often they get the absolute worst, right, of the facilities. They get the worst classrooms, they get the worst times, they get the most challenging students, and so there's some of that richness there that gets silenced because they're so scared about their contingent and precarious labor positions. Right, so
to Bill's point, you could do the side-by-side. I know he was talking about the text side and looking at bandwidth access, but I wonder about a side-by-side and looking at, say, Davidson or University of Mary Washington alongside a community college that has a completely different set of resources. Maybe that would be an interesting story to tell.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think that would be like Grosse Pointe on one side and Detroit on the other.
Right.
But no, but like this would be. I mean, if I don't know exactly what these search strings would be, but let's say you could do, again, just have a series of consistent search strings that look at search engine results, look at results within the library, look at results within the library resources that are available to students on campus, and just have that be consistently reported across a different level, across different universities.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
That's a great idea.
And if we're going to do that, we should really stick to the Carnegie classification, because then if people are doing different projects, we can start to aggregate those things, and it really gets much more useful. I mean, it gives you that kind of fake numbers that everybody wants.
Well, no, but you could also actually demonstrate. You could demonstrate actual. This is reality. This is what somebody at college A gets. This is what somebody at college B gets. This is what somebody at college C gets. This is what somebody in the world gets. And you can actually start to quantify it and illustrate what this looks like in the real world.
Yeah.
And I imagine that would be of interest to ECAR. I really do. I think they would want to see us do something like that. I'm actually. I think you guys should keep talking. I have to step out because I'm about to present at another session. So I'm gonna pop out. But it was great talking to everyone. And
thanks so much, Kristen.
Later. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I would like to add Can everybody hear me? I think
Yes, we can hear you.
Lee was talking about adjunct faculty.
Yeah.
Which
Right?
faculty?
Adjunct.
Adjunct.
Yes, I have been adjunct for over 17 years now in community college, and it is very challenging if you want to innovate something unless there is support, and I'm one of those. I like to do something different and always craving for learning new technology so I can reach community college students. And I heard uh, both of you there, with community colleges, it's really challenging when students are juggling with different problems in their life, and also with the faculty. So I was trying to say that adjunct faculty, if they have support group, we at Folsom Lake College, we have FLC Innovation Center, and every month we try to connect, we try to meet and support each other, any new ideas or anything, and we just try it out. So if we fail, that's fine, but there is support group there, and there are challenges with the privacy, and I am very privacy conscious myself with the students, and there are so many things, but we are all learning. So we need to try out some things, and um, I think if we have a strong support group, then I think whether they are adjuncts or full-time faculty or new faculty, as an educator, we can still make difference for students.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately we don't have that, those kinds of resources. I know when I was in my previous position, I wasn't contingent faculty, but I wasn't tenure track. And one of the things I noticed is the real disparity between what kind of resources are allocated, even who gets invited to parties, I mean, it made so much of a difference. Yeah, I really wish we did have that kind of resource at our institution. Now, Autumn was do we need to go?
Keep going. I'm going to take this laptop and get it back to Chris.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no.
Oh, okay.
You guys are going strong, and you guys can continue.
How are people doing? Do you want to cut it, or is there anything else you want to talk about, or?
I think finishing up your thought there, Chris, is great, and I have one more comment too. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking about, I'm really appreciating this. I almost want to call it mind mapping, these comparisons and figuring out a way to capture that as a strategy or an intervention to this problem, but also making sure we kind of name the other in tandem ideas and things that are already at play. And from an instructional design perspective, I'm thinking about all the ways I've been trying to shift things just to be able to say, here's what learning can look like and teaching and learning can look like. And showcasing those champions that are already doing it. And I even thought about going to the CIO themselves and saying, and they like it. Their job is problem solving in lots of ways. And so coming to them consistently with coherently thought through problems, like here's a technology that would help me fulfill this learning outcome or fulfill this piece. So as we all continue to do that, and then I guess in tandem with what you're saying in terms of the comparison piece, and I also think another strategy is iterative, making sure we're not like, you're doing terrible things, like like there's that part of me that, it's so obvious to us, but having that empathy with CIOs as well, to some extent coming in so that we can, massage it a little bit to have these changes happen without it being, fear-mongering ourselves to this, That makes sense.
That's a great point because, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. I didn't know I knew who the CIO was, but I didn't know him. And I just, he was the stand-in for all the things that didn't work or all the policies I didn't agree with. And through doing this project, what I realized is that he and I ideologically are very much aligned, right? And it's just a lot of the limitations are based on either, institutional, sort of financial limitations or limitations that are placed on him by what comes from above, right? So that he's a lot of times people don't listen to the experts at their institution, right? And that that's us, that's CIOs, that's all kinds of people, right? I mean,
and we have to be careful too, not to say, we'll look at Mary Washington, because they'll often say, well, that's not us, and we could never go there, like they're wackos, or whatever, and that's pie in the sky. And so that's part of what I want to be careful with in the comparison. I guess that's what I was getting to, is, how we can be strategic and how we present this, because they, I do feel like they want to solve this. They do want to provide us with something, at least some do. As you're saying, they've got that in their heart, and we just got to give them paint the picture of what that could look like without it, totally slicing their entire job in half or whatever.
Well, and being here, like, it was interesting, the talk about CIO, because we're in the process of hiring another CIO right now, and our current CIO, our interim, he's from the hospital section, and he reports to the VP Finance. But we report to the provost, and there's still a tension between what we're doing and what we want to do at DTLT versus what IT sees their role to be. And there's still some of that tension that goes there, and there's still some of that push and pull. And it's in a much more ideal situation than a lot of other places, but we still have those battles. But we have a lot of faculty on our side. We have the provost on our side, which really helps to sort of push back on those kinds of things. And the board of trustees is very supportive of what we're doing in the Domain of One's Own project. So, I mean, that helps as well. But this has been years and years and years in the making, where I've stepped into a really ideal situation. But it took a lot of small victories and a lot of, again, teaching the right people and getting the right people in places and having the right messages come from the right people in different directions and all of that I'm even now just learning about in that sort of sense. So it's an interesting thing where there's sort of the academic technology side, and then there's the IT side, and there is still a gap there, even in a place like here, which is admittedly ideal in a lot of ways. But that's not coming from the CIO. That's coming from us.
Right. And Lee, that's great to hear. I mean, I think actually your story is an important one, and the story before you got there is an important one as a model to say, what were those little iterative moments? And if we can capture that as a modeling, instead of just saying, oh, look at University of Mary Washington, they're amazing, they've got leadership that's deciding this is okay. That didn't happen overnight.
No. No.
And so I think that would be a valuable story to hear, or hint blog post.
We're still learning it. I mean, part of the problem right now is that, everybody up and left, and so now we're like an entirely new team, and we're sort of stepping into it quite naively and learning as we go along about the history of all of this. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that people who worked for DTLT were embedded in academic buildings, and our job was to fix the printers. And there are still people on campus who were like, why don't you fix the printers anymore?
Oh my gosh.
Right? So, I mean, this is, and I mean, long time, in the history of an institution, but I mean, I came in and people were telling us, yeah, that's what we used to be. Like, we used to be embedded in campus buildings, and our primary responsibility was making sure the printers worked.
I think your story is not uncommon, actually.
No,
I think that's where the optimism lies too, for me, to be honest. Like, I am seeing a sea change, Chris, and I think that's where I'm hoping we can also champion, as DePauli was saying, the support group. That we can also share the narratives that are positive and saying we're seeing a sea change. Like, as an instructional designer, I feel like our office is slowly, all of a sudden, people are starting to go, oh, they kind of know what they might be talking about, and or we sort of need them, and can we need them, and it's just this really funny dance right now. If we were to take this slice of time, which has hope to it, that 6 months, a year, we're going to see more of a change and more of an adoption.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This is, I mean, thank you, Susan. I mean,
Yeah.
I like the way you embrace, you know, reading our stuff and asking all the questions. I really appreciate it. And as I said before, thank you, Lee. When I heard you're going to be on, I was really thrilled.
Aww.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been really cool.
Yeah.
Great.
It's good to meet you.
Well, thanks everybody so much. I'm going to turn off the live feed in just a moment, but yeah, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. And Chris, I'm so delighted to continue to support you and find others, and I think there's some real salient ideas that have come out of this that we want to capture and keep going. So anybody interested, contact Chris or myself or anybody to continue to support this, what feels like an initiative really forming right now and here. So
Yeah.
thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.